Good morning and welcome to the REL Southeast webinar using the self-study process to review high school academic interventions as part of early warning system implementation. Before we begin, please download the following documents. There's a self-study guide that this webinar is based on. It's available via the following link, and that has been pasted into the chat feature of the WebEx webinar. The agenda is also there for you. So if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and download the self-study guide and the agenda, and I'll paste that again into the web box in case you're just coming in. But those links are there for you, and we will be discussing both the self-study guide and the agenda. So again, if you haven't had an opportunity to do that, please go ahead and download those documents. With that, we'll go ahead and move forward to our next slide. So today's webinar is part of a full REL Lab program webinar around early warning systems. This specific webinar is around using the self-study process to review high school academic interventions as part of early warning system implementation. My name is Kevin Smith, and we'll do some introductions in just a moment, but I'll go ahead and move us forward. So if you'd like, if you have the opportunity in the chat feature, please go ahead and enter your name, your role, and your location in the WebEx chat feature. So take a moment, please, and enter your name, role, and location in the WebEx chat feature. There's a button for that in the WebEx system, so if you get a chance, please go ahead and enter your name, role, and location in the WebEx chat feature. All right, I see Tabitha responding. Thanks, Tabitha, and Terry. Really appreciate you going ahead and submitting that. David, welcome. Sarah, we're glad to see you here today. We had an intern from a high school in New Hampshire. We're really glad you're here. Heidi, welcome. Holly, Terry, we just have a wonderful group of folks from all over the nation joining us. We're so glad that you're here. Elizabeth, thanks for joining us today. And Rainy Knight, one of our REL Southeast Literacy Alliance members. We're so pleased that you're here today. Emily and Ben and Crystal, welcome. Steve, glad to see you. Welcome, Sandy, from the Georgia Department of Education, one of our Alliance members on our Improving Mathematics Alliance. We're so pleased that you're here today. All right, so if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and feel free to enter your name, role, and location in the WebEx chat feature, and we look forward to hearing from you. All right, hi, Dana. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to introduce us now. My name is Kevin Smith. I'm the Research Alliance Manager with the REL Southeast, and I definitely want to go ahead and share with you a little bit about our presenters. I'm the in addition to being the Research Alliance Manager, I'm also the Improving Literacy Research Alliance Manager. And this work came from our work with the Improving Literacy Alliance. And we have states who have required high school reading intervention, and we have states who'd like to start providing high school reading intervention. So the work specifically came from that group and some of the work from the Improving Literacy Alliance around supporting and implementing high school reading intervention. So just a little bit of context about where this is from. I'm going to pass the baton on to my wonderful colleague, Jennifer Dombeck.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Dombeck. I'm with the REL Southeast here at FSU, and a lot of my experience is with reading language arts, mainly in the realm of interventions for reading. So most of the work I've done has been with students who are significantly behind in their reading skills, and working with those students in small groups to build their skills.
Excellent. Thanks, Jennifer. And Lori?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So glad to be with you today. My name is Lori Lee, and I'm the Deputy Director with the Just Read Florida office with the Florida Department of Education. And I'm also a member of the Improving Literacy Research Alliance, and we are so happy to have partnered with REL in the effort to bring research into practice, and I'm very pleased to be a part of this project. So thank you, Kevin.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lori. And yeah, I'm fortunate to work with wonderful folks like Lori and Jennifer in providing evidence-based practices to practitioners and stakeholders across the Southeast. It's been just phenomenal to be able to work with so many great people. Again, if you haven't had a chance, the self-study guide is available at the link in the web chat feature, and the agenda is there as well. Anytime during the course of today's webinar, if you have questions, please feel free to paste them or type them into the WebEx chat feature, and we'll be reviewing those at the end of the webinar. and working to provide responses at that point. So, but please feel free as a question comes up to go ahead and post it, and we'll take a look at those at the end and provide responses. There will be time for that at the end if you don't want to post your question early, but feel free to post it any time during today's webinar. Okay, so a few of our goals for today. For this workshop, we want to provide a brief overview of the REL Southeast, just so that you know who we are and why we're here. We also want to provide an understanding of the self-study process and how that might be used to review high school academic interventions as part of early warning system implementation. We also want to begin initial discussions for planning and reviewing high school academic interventions as part of district school early warning system implementation. There will be another webinar in 2 weeks on April 8th. This is my plug for that, to talk more specifically about some of the areas that we found from research have support to be part of this review process. So we'll go into more depth on those areas in 2 weeks on April 8th, and I'll have a different cast of folks with me to help talk about those areas. But just wanted to mention that webinar will be in 2 weeks, and you're all, of course, invited and welcome to join that. Then finally, we'll solicit participants' feedback on this workshop. As soon as you exit the webinar, you'll be provided a link to complete a survey, and please do that because we definitely like to see if what we're providing meets your needs, and we also like to know what we can do better or differently and what other topics you may be interested in for webinars or face-to-face events like this. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start our presentation. So again, I'm going to start with a very brief overview of the REL Southeast. There are 10 regional educational laboratories across the United States. They're all part of the Institute of Education Sciences, which is under the umbrella of the U.S. Department of Education. Our specific REL footprint is in the Southeast, which comprises the states of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. So we work with the state education agencies and local education agencies, advocacy groups, parents, stakeholders across this region. And we often also have projects that have a more national footprint like this. We're able to invite people from all over the United States to find out a little bit about our work and in particular share some of the practices and information that we've been able to glean from working with these phenomenal groups across the Southeast. Also briefly wanted to mention one of the products that the Institute of Education Sciences, or IS, puts out are practice guides. And the What Works Clearinghouse actually convenes panels of experts from across the nation, both practitioners and researchers, to look at the evidence behind certain practices over sometimes like the past 20 years or so. And they work to compile recommendations that they are able to basically define from all of the evidence that they found from hundreds or thousands of studies that they reviewed. And they provide these guides that give these evidence-based recommendations to practitioners for how to approach different things at the SEA or at the school level, at the state level. Again, things that you might want to include in professional development or developing the kind of guide that we've developed for this specific webinar. So you'll see, and we won't get into a lot of this today, it comes up in the webinar we're going to do in 2 weeks, but much of the evidence that we're able to share from this guide that we've developed come from practice guides and other studies, but again, much of it's based on practice guide work. So we're glad that those are available to you. And just Google IES practice guides or What Works Clearinghouse practice guides, and you'll find all of them. And they're on various topics such as improving adolescent literacy, effective classroom and intervention practices. That's one that, again, we use to create this guide. Okay, we also offer a free Ask a REL service, and it's a reference desk service that's available for free for practitioners and stakeholders from anywhere. Of course, we typically respond to questions that come in from our area, the Southeast, but if you submit those questions to IES or to the REL Southeast website, we provide reference desk service where we have references and summaries of research that are tailored to specific questions. I always like to give a good example. A question came in a couple of years back from a friend of mine, actually, and he said, all right, I'm a coach at a school, I'm a literacy coach at a school. The teachers are always asking me, should the kids read the question before they read the passage, or should they read the question after they read the passage when they're taking a test? Well, I'm not going to give you the answer. This is my plug that you feel free to go, and you can also see all of our archived Ask a REL responses on our website in a searchable database. So feel free to go to our website and look for the answer to that and many other questions to try to find those probing answers that you may have, but also feel free to submit those questions to us. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into the meat of our presentation, which again focuses on early warning indicators. And a lot of work's been done nationally around early warning systems and early warning indicators, and other RELs are doing similar webinars and have provided guides and other work around early warning systems. So what I want to talk to you today briefly is the big picture of early warning systems. And basically, there's an ABC to it, as we like to say. The A in this formula is attendance, because we know that students who don't regularly attend class fail behind in their coursework and often see their grades suffer. So looking at students' data over time and attendance can actually help predict whether students are going to be successful in high school and beyond. So that's one indicator in most of our early warning systems. And we actually have an archived webinar from Robert Balfans, who is an expert in this area from Johns Hopkins University, that you can preview on our early warning systems website. The B in this formula is behavior incidents. So similarly, students who have behavior incidents can indicate that a student's disengaged with the school environment, and again, they're at risk. So it's things to look for that might mean that the student's at risk. And then the C is what we're going to focus on in the two webinar series that we have, which is course performance. So a number of course failures and overall grade point average obviously correlate with the student's probability of graduating in 4 years. And while it says early warning systems, most early warning systems start in middle school or 9th grade. We all know that 9th grade is a big transition year, and many students who struggle in 9th grade don't move on to graduate. So really most of the early warning systems work in particular focuses on making sure that students successfully transition to high school in their 9th grade year. So a lot of the work that we're sharing is of course applicable in middle school and later high school, but the focus for most of this work and many research studies focus on those transition years. The transition from elementary to middle and middle to high school are very important years for students. And again, most early warning systems work focus on those transition years, and in particular 9th grade and high school. Okay, so a little bit about our early warning system indicator for course performance. We know that students who have a number of course failures and overall grade point average correlate with the student's probability of graduating in 4 years. So if a student fails a course, he or she has to make those courses, those credits outside of the regular scheduled school time to stay on track, and that's hard to do. A lot of schools with budget cuts have cut things like summer school. There are virtual options available for students that some students take advantage of, but they still have to do that in addition to their normal school day. So, if a student's already struggling with courses, the likelihood of them being able to take the time to make up credits while they're currently, enrolled in high school, it becomes difficult. So again, poor course performance can indicate disengagement in classroom level as well. It's definitely something to consider. We know that if students struggle with course performance, the likelihood of them graduating in time is diminished. So we try to make sure that our students are having success in the courses that they're enrolled in. So what we're going to talk about next week, or I should say in 2 weeks, are the 8 areas, as I mentioned, that we found from research that should be considered when you're planning and implementing high school academic interventions. Okay, the first part of this, again, we'll go into much further detail next week, but the first step is making sure that you identify those students who are struggling and schedule them into intervention in a timely manner. Okay, the second part or second step or area of our guide is making sure that valid and reliable assessments focus on vocabulary and comprehension in reading and algebra and problem solving and mathematics are selected. And again, that can help make sure that you are placing students accurately in their interventions. Using a data-driven curriculum, using empirically proven practices is important as well, to making sure that you're, have a handle on how these students are performing in the courses that they're in, that there's progress monitoring that's occurring, that you make sure as students are in intervention or in their regular instruction, there's a way to make sure that students are on track and that they're not struggling. The fourth area, making sure that sufficient time has been allocated to schedule and facilitate intervention. Students who are far below where they need to be in reading and mathematics would need additional time. So thinking about what that looks like and how to schedule it. And again, we'll have more discussion around that as we move forward in 2 weeks around that specific webinar. The fifth area, making sure that there's a plan developed to identify, hire, develop, and retain the best possible interventionists. Of course, we all know that the best outcomes in education are around making sure that the best possible educators are available to work with our children. And that's something that the guide found, there's a lot of research behind that. So we want to make sure, of course, that we hire the best possible educators to work with our students who are struggling. And that's not always the case. So it is very important to make sure we have our best educators in front of our most needy students. Area number 6, making sure that professional development is established. Those teachers who are providing intervention need the most support of anyone at your school. It's really critical that interventionists, and I'm a former reading coach who worked at a high school with high school reading interventionists, it's critical that they have ongoing support, that there's someone there they can go to with questions from a variety of different standpoints, but that they receive professional development as well on best practices for providing intervention for students, because it is really hard work to provide academic interventions at the high school level. It is not an easy job at all. I have a lot of respect for the folks who do that, and again, they need as much support as we can possibly provide to them. Then number 7, making sure that communication happens between, you think of a high school, teachers in many cases are disconnected. In middle and elementary schools, there's teams, there's grade level meetings. In high school, we get away from that a lot. It's a lot departmentalized. So the same people who impact the same student don't often have conversations. But it's really important to do that, to make sure that you find a way for teachers who work with the same students to interact on a regular basis. And we know the way scheduling works at a high school, it's typically done almost randomly, and there really isn't a chance for teachers who have the same students to work together all the time. So finding a way to make that happen, to get together to talk about students who have potential issues, is really important. And of course, keeping parents involved and the interventionist, talking to the classroom teacher, all of these are really important concepts in terms of communication. Then the 8th area, making sure that a healthy and safe learning environment is established. Sometimes intervention gets relegated to not so friendly areas for intervention. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in this in this webinar, as well as in the following webinar that we're going to do in 2 weeks. But it's just a really important component for intervention that not get overlooked. So all of these things funnel together into our guide that we wrote, again, as the Improving Literacy Alliance. We have phenomenal Alliance members who are able to provide an incredible job in pulling this together for implementing high school academic interventions. The working document is developed by our Improving Literacy Research Alliance, and our members help to guide intervention, development, and implementation. So that's the reason the guide was developed, and that's why we're hopeful that it'll be used for that purpose. So in a big picture, that's all the areas that are going to be discussed. Today, we're going to focus much more specifically on the self-study process in general. So we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So a quick introduction to the High School Academic Intervention Self-Study Guide. Like I said, a working document was developed, and the purpose of it is to bring together maybe state leaders, district leaders, school leaders, or all of the above to look at how intervention works in your state, in your district, at your school, and think about all those components, bringing the team together to really work together to find a way to make sure that it's supported as well as it can be. We know that academic intervention can be implemented and is implemented at any grade level. Focusing at the high school level is critical because it's often a student's last chance to become ready for the academic demands of post-secondary education and careers. And if we lose our students in 9th and 10th grade, they really struggle to find, the type of job that would provide wages to support them and their families. So it's really an important, huge opportunity for us to support students early in the high school realm. So I see a couple of questions coming up about, will the PowerPoint be available after today's webinar? Absolutely. We will be sure to send the PowerPoint out as a link with an email after the webinar. We'll be glad to do that. So thanks so much for mentioning that. Okay, so with that, Lori's going to talk a little bit about how high school academic interventions have worked, especially in the reading world in Florida, and why this guide might be beneficial for folks.
Okay. Certainly in Florida, our office is supportive of all things literacy throughout our state, but we've had some changes in legislation in the last couple of years. For a number of years, legislation required that students that scored at level 1 or level 2 on our state assessment, and those are the lowest levels at which a student can score, those students had to receive reading intervention, whether it be in an intensive reading class or it be in a content area class. last year during the legislative session, that language was removed from statute. So it is no longer required in Florida that our districts provide reading intervention in any specific sort of manner. We like to stress that flexibility with responsibility. So now our districts have the flexibility to serve the students as they deem best, but the responsibility is still there for them to develop those college and career-ready young people. And so a guide like this becomes especially important as the districts now begin to evaluate what they've been doing in the past, if there's anything that they can and should do differently, and what the data suggests to them what that process might look like in the future. And so that change in legislation has greatly provided that flexibility, but also then the need for a guide like this where those districts and schools can engage in that self-reflection and evaluation moving forward.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lori. So a little bit of context about the development of the guide and how it might be helpful for those in use in states. And I know my friend Rainey's on from South Carolina. They're in the process of really building high school reading intervention, which occurs in a lot of places, but it's not, the same everywhere. So this guide might help districts, and I've done a little work with one of the districts there, thinking about those areas that are important to consider as they're building their first or broadening the type of interventions that they provide across their state. So again, just something to consider. Okay, as we move on to the next slide, I'm going to again post the links in case you haven't had a chance to pick up, especially the self-study guide, because I'm very briefly going to provide a big picture overview of the guide and some of the components that are within it. So the guide itself was developed to help districts think about what baseline information may be helpful as they are planning interventions. So what data should we be collecting as a group? What should we really be thinking about? What are some guiding questions to consider? Then, of course, prioritizing their needs. So what should we look at first? What's really important to consider? What are things that, yes, they'd be nice in the future, but we absolutely need to do right away? So that's part of the guide as well. Then gathering progress monitoring information. So maybe you're already implementing intervention. How should we review this? How can we make sure what we're doing is effective? And then, of course, the whole evaluating the implementation of what you're doing. So a quick overview of the guide. Pages 1 through 6, which we're going to focus on today, is really the introduction, and it talks a little bit about the process. So as I'm looking through the guide, box 1 on page 5 really gives a nice overview of the steps it would take to conduct a whole self-study and really how much time it might take to do each of those things as well. So we tried to lay that out as clearly as we could. Now I'm going to flip past the guide. The guide's broken up into those 8 areas I briefly discussed earlier with guiding questions and possible sources of evidence. At the end of this, on page 21, we're going to focus on that as well. It's the consensus rating form. So today we're talking about the process. So the process would be, Jennifer will get into this very specifically in a moment, assembling your team and then having them rate individually and then coming to consensus. So the consensus rating form is on page 21, and again, we'll be talking about that today. And then the last document I'm going to talk about briefly is the planning next steps form, which is where after you come to consensus on how you would rate yourself on each of these areas, what are next steps you want to take? How do you prioritize what you should do next? Then at the end of this document, it's appendix that has annotated, basically it's an annotated bibliography that has all of the sources, quotes from all the sources that we pulled from when we're creating the guide. So that's a very brief and quick overview of the guide itself. And now Jennifer is going to talk a little bit about some other guides that we've developed.
Okay, so as Kevin mentioned, we have developed several guides here at the REL Southeast. We have the Early Literacy Interventions Guide. We've developed the Summer Reading Camp Self-Study Guide focused on 3rd graders, and also now this High School Academic Intervention Guide. So when I go through the following slide to discuss the process a school or a district would need to take to sort of get things up and going and using the self-study process, I'm doing so from a perspective of, regardless of what specific guide you're using, you'd still have to follow these same steps. I know in some districts, someone who's oversees literacy might be dealing with K through 12. So for them, these steps would be relevant regardless of what grade levels you're working with. So again, the self-study process is using a guide with predetermined areas of focus and questions to collect, share, and discuss data that relates to the area being studied. You would assemble a team of relevant individuals who are knowledgeable in the specific area you're studying, in this case, high school academic intervention. And as I move forward, I know Kevin mentioned time, how much time these things take, and that's often like critical at districts and schools. So it's really important to kind of have yourself ready as the person running the self-study process, but also the team, so that you're not, you don't want to waste anyone's time, and you want to make sure that when you get together for discussions, you're optimizing that time. Okay, so when I think about the self-study process, I have two overarching goals in mind. One is the goal is to reflect about your current strengths in planning intervention or implementing your intervention. And the second is identifying areas where improvement is needed. And again, this is done as a team. And we've prepared a few visuals for you to sort of help you see the process, the step-by-step process you'd go through either at a district level or school. So the very first step in the self-study process would be identifying a facilitator who is knowledgeable in several areas. You want them to have an understanding of best practices in academic intervention, but also the policies around intervention for your district, state, an understanding of the self-study process, how this works, can they lead a team well, can they help bring people together to sort of move forward with the self-study process. The second step would be to identify the self-study team. Depending on the district or school, this team could look quite different. Some people who might be on that team would be classroom or intervention teachers, instructional coaches, guidance counselors, school administrators or district admin, but also chief academic officers. So it really depends on if this guide is being used at the school level or the district level. But a couple of things to keep in mind is you want to think about the people who would be directly involved in the process, people who would be impacted by the process. For example, a classroom teacher may not be delivering an intervention, but are students removed from their classroom to receive an intervention. That classroom teacher would probably be very interested in knowing what is happening with their student when they're removed from the classroom. So while they might not be delivering the intervention themselves, it might be important to have a teacher representing a subject area or grade level involved in that process. And of course, you want the team to be knowledgeable in academic interventions. You want this team to be vested in the process, and you need a team of people who are willing to work together. And if you assemble a really great team with all of the relevant personnel, you will have buy-in in whatever decisions are made. And then the third step is that the facilitator would need to collect relevant data and sources of evidence. So this becomes critical when we talk about time. What you don't want is to gather your group of people together and start looking through the guide and go, oh, we need that piece of information in order to answer these questions. So you really need to think at the district or school level, what type of data would I need to help this team move forward and rate ourselves on our implementation or planning. It might be as simple as just having school schedules, intervention schedules, student assessment results. You might need some more complex plans like literacy plans for your school, meeting notes from plans, from planning meetings, and maybe teacher student surveys you've used in the past. But again, you want to really think about your district or school and all the information your team will need to help answer the questions about your planning or implementation. Okay, so again, when we talk about the facilitator, this person is leading the entire process. We want to ensure this person has a good understanding of the whole process, because again, we want to make sure everyone's time is utilized well and that the people on the team are getting good guidance from this facilitator. Okay, so this next figure shows the process you'd actually go through when you're conducting actual self-study. And again, this process would be used for any kind of self-study, regardless of the specific areas in the guide. So the first step is the facilitator would present the overview, and allow the team time to review the guide. You want to make sure your team is all on the same page. You would want them to review each area of the guide, make sure they have an understanding of each area of focus, and allow them time to ask questions so that when it's time for them to rate these areas independently, they know what they need to do. The second step is when the individuals on the team do individual ratings of each area. And I want to stress that they're doing these independently. And the reason why you really want these ratings done independently with each member of the team is because everyone's coming from a very different perspective, whether they're a classroom teacher, an administrator, a literacy coach. They have a lot of different things in mind when they think about academic interventions. So you really want to ensure these ratings are done independently so that you are representing everyone's point of view who is on the team. And in doing so, the team would need to review that data that the facilitator has collected to help answer some of their questions. You know, the 9th grade reading teacher who's on the team might not know what's happening with the schedules for 11th and 12th grade reading, but it might be relevant for them to know in terms of rating their school's overall implementation. So having all of that information available for everyone on the team is really beneficial in ensuring people are answering these questions to the best of their ability and rating their implementation. The next step is the consensus rating. So at this point, the entire team has independently rated each area in the guide, and the facilitator is going to guide a consensus rating process. So the point of this is kind of to ask, okay, where does everyone stand on their opinion on how we're implementing or planning for this area in the guide? And what do we all agree on so that we can move forward? Or where do we disagree, and let's discuss that so that we can sort of make a plan to move forward that we can all be comfortable with. Step 4 is planning next steps. So here's really where you hone in on, okay, what are we going to do? Let's prioritize. You want to make this realistic for your school. You want to set achievable goals. So identify 2 to 3 priorities for action. You want to ask yourselves, where do we see areas that have the most improvement needed? But also, what is the most feasible for us? So you would complete a detailed plan as a team for your next steps. It would be based on urgency, again, where is the most need and feasibility.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the consensus building process because we've done this in pilots and actually used another guide with a large group of educators in Mississippi. So in doing that, as Jennifer mentioned, you really get some great conversations when you're going through the self-study process. And it's important, as she mentioned, to bring in folks from different levels and with different perspectives. For example, when we piloted the guide before, we had some district leaders and school-based leaders, so the district literacy supervisor, for example, and the principal of the school, along with teachers and coaches. And when they went through the school environment, for example, for intervention, one of the areas that was listed in terms of school environment was rated very high by the principal and by the district personnel. And it was around making sure that the area that was selected, or the room that was selected for intervention, was appropriate for interventions. Because the principal and district both said we've assigned areas for everyone, we provided a kidney table for small groups, and that it's functional for them. When the teacher and coach came in with their ratings that were much lower, they had a conversation around that and said, yeah, we have an area developed, but for example, one of the interventions was provided in a hallway, which, while it was space that was available because the school was really cramped and it was the best they had to offer, it was not conducive for intervention because it's a high volume area, there were students coming by, and students involved in intervention, these students in particular, were very easily distracted. So that's something to consider. When you bring all team members together, they can think about issues like that, and they can talk about where, yes, you provided an area, but it may not have been the best area for intervention. How can we fix this? So they were able to go on and plan next steps and talk about another area that they had in the school that would work better for intervention. So that's just a quick example of that consensus building and how it really can help lead to that planning next steps. And Lori was going to provide an example as well.
Certainly. As we were out and about this past summer, we visit our summer reading camps in our state. And in more than one place, we saw students that were engaged in a computer lab with technology, which was great. We encourage that, and that's part of their summer reading camp plan, is that access to the technology. However, while students were in the computer lab, their teachers with instructional expertise were simply circulating, making sure that students were engaged in the program on the computer. And when we visited with folks after the visit, we asked some guiding questions and enabling them to reflect on that, thinking about, is that the best use of their instructional expertise? Could not we have had a small group being conducted in the computer lab with a table back to the side, so our teachers could have been engaged in instruction with a small group of students at the same time other students were working with the technology. So again, the technology was provided, there was a computer lab there, students were engaged with it, but was the use of the instructional expertise, those teachers in the room, the best that it could be? So again, some different perspectives certainly came into play as we reflected upon that practice.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lori. So we mentioned this about consensus. We were just talking about a couple of examples of the importance of consensus building and bringing in those different levels by individual team members, the individual rating, and then the facilitator discussion around those. It really is important to consider as you're thinking about the context of how academic interventions are provided. So we talked a little bit about planning next steps as well, and the importance of planning next steps is that idea that you prioritize based on the strength of evidence. And like I said, the guide is developed and has a lot of evidence around both providing math intervention and literacy interventions at the high school level in particular. So thinking about where's the strength, you know, and what really do we need to focus on? What does the evidence say? Because in many cases, again, having worked in schools for well over a decade, in many cases, it's decisions that are made from a practical standpoint, which is an important consideration, but there may not be evidence base to support it. So, you know, our guide is based on evidence, so it might provide helpful insight into things to consider. As Jennifer mentioned, reviewing those consensus scores that show that need to develop or improve, and looking at those 2 or 3 top priorities for action planning that not only are urgent, but are actionable. So that's important to consider as you're moving forward. And also, the other side of it is thinking about challenges, because we all know as you start making changes, you're going to run into other unanticipated challenges that are going to come up. That's another reason it's important to bring in a team of various members, because they'll be able to think about those challenges. You know, if you're moving forward and it's a technology change, not one like Lori mentioned, but you're adding a technology component, it's really important to make sure that your network, you know, administrator at the school is on board. If you have new logins that are coming into play, there are a lot of different components to consider as you're making all of these changes, as you're making these discussions about how to move forward. So it's just important, again, to bring together your team and that you have insight from all the different areas that would be impacted by this. Lori's going to talk a little bit about a self-study process in Florida and what they've done and how they might use this guide with their districts and schools across the state.
Okay, certainly. Our District K-12 Comprehensive Reading Plan is a plan that has that we've implemented here in Florida for a number of years. This is the plan that's required by legislation. Districts submit a plan that details their instruction and it details assessments that districts will administer to their students, student placement protocol, instructional practices. Many of the areas of focus that are incorporated in the self-study guide that we're talking about today are included in our K-12 reading plan. And that plan is tied to funding in our state. It's the responsibility of our office to review those plans and then approve them, enabling our districts to receive funding. And we know that, as we've been talking about it extensively this morning, how important it is to have a diverse team of folks gathered together, not only to engage in the self-study process with this particular guide, but also in the development of our K-12 reading plans. It's really important that we have those variety of perspectives at the table as they formulate their plans. We also encourage reflection from the previous year as they consider drafting and submitting their plan for next year. So that reflection is very much at the forefront as they plan for the upcoming school year. We provided some tools for our districts and our schools, and even down to the classroom level, to help them do that. This guide, again, is going to be a very important tool for our high schools as they consider their practice in serving their high school students. We have the same legislative change for middle school, so I can see this tool being valuable for our middle school folks as well. Part of what our office does is we provide technical assistance, which is largely in an effort to help our districts self-study. And so when they call us, they may call us and ask us questions about legislative changes or legislative requirements, and we're glad to share that information with them. And they're obligated to follow the law, but how they do that is largely up to them. And so when it comes to instructional practices or the assessments they're using or the curriculum they're using, those are all local decisions. But we like to ask some guiding questions that help them to reflect on their practices and on their materials and on student placement protocol, et cetera, to help them really reflect and decide for themselves if what they're doing is best for their students or if some changes need to be made. So again, this guide is so detailed and so systematic, it will be a great tool for our folks to use to aid them in that self-reflection and that self-study process. Also in our state, I mentioned the visits that we made to summer reading camps for our elementary level folks. We also do that to help support our districts in the implementation of their K-12 reading plan. And so those visits take place in the fall. And this past year, we visited about 30 districts, almost half of our districts in our state, with the whole idea and the whole emphasis on support and really on self-study. And so we spend a day in a school. We speak with district level folks, and oftentimes at the school there's a representation basically of the team. The district level folks involved with the plan, the school level folks, perhaps the principal, the reading coach, some teachers, representatives from ESE, from ELL, all of those groups typically are with us as we visit before we visit classrooms and also after we spend time in those classrooms. And the whole day is really centered around self-study and reflection. For instance, we visited one county this past summer, and as we asked questions and as we spent time in classrooms and as we took time at the end of the day, it was clear that in the district and in that school, they were administering a great number of assessments. And so we went through and they kept listing them, and afterward, the questions were, well, what do you use that data for? And how do you use that? And is that a good use of the time that you have with your students? And as they began and worked through that self-study process, even while we were in the room, they came to the conclusion that they really should eliminate some of those assessments because they were not using the data. And they had assessments that were duplicative. So those assessments that collected the same information just in a different way. And so while we certainly didn't require a mandate that they do that, we were glad to lead them through that process where they could come to that conclusion that that was best for the students in their district. So the entire process of the site visit is very much in an effort to promote reflection and self-study. And then finally, the use of the self-study data. This is hugely important. There's no reason to go through this entire process and spend a great deal of time involved in the study guide and gathering your folks together and all of the resources you need to do do this properly if the data is not going to be used. And so we encourage our folks, as they engage in this process and they make those determinations about what next steps should be, is to have their calendars in front of them and not only determine those next steps, but determine a timeline for implementation of those next steps. So good intentions don't get lost in the shuffle of everyday school activities and all of those things that, you know, they say life happens, and it certainly does in our districts and our schools, and so we don't want to lose focus. And so if our calendars are marked, that helps us definitely to make sure that we are taking steps to make sure we're implementing those next steps based on that data. So that's pretty much how our self-study process goes here in Florida, especially related to our K-12 comprehensive reading plan. And as we reflect on how to better support, this is certainly one tool that we'll provide to our folks in an effort to help them do better with this process.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lori, for giving a great example of how this process works in your state. And just to follow up with that on the importance of making sure the right team is there, I used a similar guide with educators across a state earlier last year, and it went really well. Issues that I found that came up, however, is in some cases a superintendent or an assistant superintendent really was the decision maker on some of the processes that even happen at the school level, like what assessment they're going to use, or you know, how many teachers are going to be available to provide intervention. So sometimes, even if it's done at the school level, it's important to make sure that those policies or the resources, you know, there's an understanding for how that's going to work from a district perspective. So, you know, you might want to use this guide if you're at a district level at a principal's meeting, or if you're a principal at a school, bring it up for an agenda item for a principal's meeting, because in most districts that are at least medium to large size, there are principal meetings that occur once a month. It wouldn't help to bring a guide like this to one of those meetings and say, you know, let's talk about from a district perspective, how are our resources going to be allocated for high school intervention, or, you know, how many FTEs am I going to have to provide intervention for math or reading at the high school level. And same thing at the state level. It might be good to share a tool like this, as Lori mentioned, with your district reading or math supervisors, and say, you know, these are things to consider as you're working with your district team to consider how to implement high school academic interventions. And at the school level, like I said, it's very actionable because things are happening at the school level. It's just important to make sure that all the different team members who are important to this process are on board, and that, you know, ultimately the decision makers are in agreement and in understanding for what, you know, the data that's available, what needs to happen, and what can happen. Okay, so now is the time that we want to open it up for any questions. So you have the chat feature. I've seen some chat information added. Thank you all again for introducing yourselves at the beginning. So now's the time, if you have questions, to go ahead and submit them through the chat box, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to mute us for a few moments while you guys type your questions in. So go ahead. We've got plenty of time left. Enter any questions that you have, and we'll be glad to respond to those. As I mentioned, feel free to add any questions that you have at this time. I'm going to go ahead and just mention next steps so that you have that. Oh, I see a question coming in. What are the different ways that a school could monitor progress within an intervention to assess its effectiveness as part of an early warning system? That's a great question. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit on the webinar next, but I'll talk about it now. We don't mind. So most interventions that are available, whether they're for reading or mathematics at a high school or science or really anything, have progress monitoring built in. They could be curriculum-based measures, or there could be alignment to a separate progress monitor that you have for those students. So, you know, I'll give an example. In Florida, we have an available progress monitoring system for students in grades 9 through 12 in reading that students have, that districts and schools have access to. So certainly they could look at that progress monitoring data, which is provided. I think there's 3 assessment windows still. So a district or a school could look at how students are performing, and certainly the intervention teacher could look at how students are performing on that progress monitoring assessment. Then, like I said, within the interventions, in many cases, there's an ongoing progress monitor that's available once a week or once a month. It depends on the intervention, but the teachers could check data on. Anything else to add to that?
Right. The progress monitoring within the intervention itself is going to reveal whether the student is mastering those skills that they have been taught. And then that big picture progress monitoring in our state, that the system that's available is a progress monitoring tool that's available 3 times per year. And that's kind of an overall picture of their literacy skills. Are those skills overall improving? So the 3 times a year is big picture, and then the built-in to whatever an intervention program provides some more specific information regarding whether the student is really mastering those skills which he or she has been taught.
Yeah, Jennifer?
And I just wanted to add to that, in addition to having this progress monitoring data so that we can look at how students are responding to this intervention, also having someone in place at the school, maybe it's a literacy coach, that can conference with these intervention teachers or classroom teachers that are providing intervention, because there might be more to what we need to know about the students than just what's reflected in their progress monitoring assessments. You know, there might be some behavior difficulties the teachers are having with students during intervention, and that's when this ongoing support comes into play that Kevin mentioned as well. So looking at the big picture in addition to the actual assessments the students are taking, you know, behavior and structure of groups, things of that nature, because the teachers doing these interventions need support as well so that they feel that they're effective.
That's a great point, and we'll talk more about that on our next webinar. We'll actually go into pretty good detail about that. But one other quick point I want to make is, in terms of qualitative data, you know, talk to the students, talk to the teachers, talk to the classroom teacher who's teaching English or mathematics to these students, talk to the interventionist at the end of the year. You know, really try to talk to the students, see how is this working for you? Is this providing the kind of support that's benefiting your, you know, coursework? Do you see application back in your English and math class? It is important to talk to them and make sure, you know, of course, monitoring their grades is important too. That's part of this as well. You know, it's really important to talk to the folks who are doing this and see how it is working. Do we need to better align what's happening in intervention with what's happening in your classroom? You know, those are the kind of questions I think that'll help you also from a qualitative standpoint see, you know, what do we need to improve? Because data is important. It's one aspect to look at, and it's a really important aspect to look at, but really having those conversations with folks about how it's going, particularly the students, is important too. High school students will tell you often more than you want to know, but they will definitely share how it's going and whether what they're doing is beneficial or not. One other question that's come up, what are some resources, for example, websites, for participants to find information on high-quality secondary reading interventions? What a great question to ask. There are 2 different sites I'm going to talk about real briefly. One is the What Works Clearinghouse, and the What Works Clearinghouse does reviews of academic interventions. That's really a large part of what Works Clearinghouse does, doing what works. So you can actually search for interventions that have effectiveness, and they will provide the level of evidence, effect sizes. They really provide a review of studies that have been done on different interventions, including high school interventions. A little plug for us as well, the REL Southeast did a review of high school, really secondary literacy interventions that should be coming out this year. So keep an eye out for REL Southeast. Our products that come out, it's under review right now, but we have conducted a study of reviews. Jennifer and I were part of the team members who did the reviews of that. Was it like since '94 or something? Yeah, about the last 20 years or so. It's only literacy. We did not look at mathematics, but looking at literacy intervention studies over the last 20 years. Another site that I'll talk about, there's the National Center for Intensive Intervention. They also have reviews, progress monitoring tools that you could use, as well as work with intervention as well. So that's another good site to look at, the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Just Google it, you'll find it. They're a really good site. And What Works Clearinghouse are 2 sites that I specifically recommend to look at for finding more information on effective interventions that are used at the high school level. Well, those were great questions. We really appreciate those coming in, and we'll give you another minute for any last-minute questions that come in. While we do that, I do want to mention, like I said, our next webinar where we will get into the weeds a little bit of some of these questions that come up with how implementation and planning for intervention occurs will be in 2 weeks on April 8th. And I'm going to have a couple of different educators, both at the district and school level, to talk about how they plan for, prepare, and review their interventions in terms of high school academic interventions. So I'm excited to be able to bring together a team of folks who work at the district and school level to talk about interventions and how that's implemented at the high school level across. It's actually 2 districts in Florida and Central Florida. So looking forward to having that team on board to talk about what each of these areas looks like. So really getting into some specifics about the evidence to support these areas, as well as some information about what it actually looks like at the school. And we provide a little bit of insight, both Lori and Jennifer and I, all 3 of us, about some issues that come up. Again, today's webinar was more focused on the big picture of how do we work with self-study? How do we consider doing this when we're wanting to either plan for or implement our high school interventions? We really appreciate you taking this time to share with us. And when you do complete the webinar, when you close out your browser, you'll be directed to a survey. Again, please if you would like, fill out the survey. It definitely helps us know how this was helpful for you, what we could do to improve, and things that you're interested in knowing more about in the future. All questions that we want to know more about from you. And again, want to take this moment to thank you guys for taking the time to spend with us. If you have other questions, if you want any kind of follow-up, please feel free to email me. My email address is at the bottom of the slide, ksmith@fcrr.org, and I'll be glad to farm the questions out to my colleagues or answer the questions if I can. Also, you can submit an Ask REL, as we mentioned earlier. Feel free to do that, and we'll provide, and I may even submit if it's a question that is appropriate for an Ask REL, I may submit it directly there. But feel free to contact us anytime. We really appreciate you, again, taking the time to be here. We're glad to support you in any way that we can. And thanks so much for your very nice comment. We appreciate that. And again, that's an infographic that will be on our website. Someone mentioned they like the slide on how complex this work is. It really is, that was shown at the beginning. That's actually from a separate infographic that the person who's running this behind the scenes, Nathan Archer, created, that will be on a whole website that we've developed for early warning systems at the REL Southeast. It's also part of the PowerPoint slides that we'll send you. But again, feel free to contact us anytime. Can't say how much we thank you for being here. And with that, we'll go ahead and close it up. Have a wonderful day and weekend. Thanks again. Bye-bye.